Welcome to part 36 of our series on building a Zelda-like game in Phaser 3. In this video, we'll start implementing the attacking mechanics, allowing the player to use weapons in combat. We'll set up an attack state, create a weapon component, and refine our state machine to handle player attacks smoothly. If you're new here, this is part of a full series where we create a Zelda-inspired game from scratch. Check out the playlist link in the description to start from the beginning. Alright, let's dive in and start building our attack mechanics. Now that we've built out our core dungeon mechanics, like traps, inventory management, and locked doors, it's time to give our players some offensive power. In this section, we'll dive into attacking and weapons, creating a simple combat system that allows our player to strike enemies and interact with the world in new ways. We'll start by implementing a basic attack, introducing a new state for our player, creating components for our weapons, and ensuring everything feels responsive and satisfying. Let's jump in and bring some action to our adventure. To add support to allow our players to attack our enemies, and later on for our boss enemy to attack our player, we'll need to create a new state, and this will be our attack state. To get to this state for our player, we'll need to add a check in our idle and movement states, where if our player presses our attack key, we'll want to transition to our new state. Once we get to our attack state, we'll need to check which weapon or item our player currently has equipped, and then we'll want to attack with that weapon. And so for each of our weapons our player can equip, they'll have different properties that we'll need to keep track of. We'll create a base interface for our weapons that each weapon will implement. This is going to keep track of things like the damage that weapon can do, which animations are tied to that weapon, and the physics body that makes up that weapon as they come in different shapes. As an example, our player's sword will swing in front of our player, versus something like an arrow, our physics body needs to move across our screen once we shoot our arrow. Since our player can equip a variety of weapons, we'll create a new weapon component that'll be responsible for returning that weapon instance. This component will also return things like our physics body for our weapon, how much damage that weapon can do, and it's also going to be responsible for calling our update method on our weapon instance. That way we don't have to keep track of all these weapons from our player class. To get started with our changes, first we'll start with our new state. So let's go into our source code. Under our components, our state machine, our state's our character. Let's make a new state. We'll call this our attack state. Let's go into our idle state. We'll copy our code from our idle state over to our attack state. We'll update our class name, so we'll have attack state. Let's update our state name. Let's jump over to our character states. We'll add that in. So now for our code, in our onEnter method, let's get rid of our animation. First, we'll reset our GameObject's velocity. And now for the time being, we're just going to transition right back to our idle state. And once we create a new component for our weapon component, we'll come back and update this. So I'm just going to comment this code out. We'll paste in our code for our state machine. Let's go to our idle state. Now down in our onUpdate method, we'll get rid of our code for our controls. And let's just comment out our code here where we transition to our next state. So now we'll need to update our idle and our movement states to allow us to transition to the state. So let's go into our idle state. So after we grab a reference to our controls, we'll want to check to see if our attack key was pressed. If it was, we'll go to our new state. So we'll do if our controls is our attack key just down. Then we want to transition to our attack state. So let's copy this. We'll update our reference. And then we'll return early. And then if our attack key is not pressed, we'll check to see if we have our other input and go to our movement state. So let's copy this block of code here. Let's go into our move state. Now for our move state, we'll do the same check. And now finally, we just need to update our player class to have our new state. So let's open up our player class. We'll go to where we add our states. I'm going to copy this here. Let's add in our new attack state. And now if we want to test, let's go into our attack state. In our onEnter method, I'm just going to do a console log. I'm just going to say test. Now in our browser, if we press our attack key, we should see our console log message being logged when we try to attack. Now if we start moving around and press our attack key, we should see the same thing. Before we create our weapon component, let's define our interface that each of our weapons will need to implement. For that, under our GameObjects folder, we'll make a new folder. We're going to call this Weapons. We'll make a new file. We'll call this our base weapon. Now in here, we'll do Export Interface, and we'll call this Weapon. So for each of the weapons that we create in our game, we'll need a property to keep track of what is the base damage that this weapon can do. As an example, when we attack with our sword, that might do 1 damage to an enemy, versus if we attack with our boomerang, it might do 0 damage, but paralyze the enemy. We'll need a property to keep track if we're currently attacking with our weapon. So when we go to swing with our sword, we'll want to set this to be true, and then only after our animation is finished, we'd set this to be false. Versus if we attack with something like our boomerang, once we throw our weapon, we would set that to be true. We would need to wait for our weapon to get back to our player, and we set it back to false. To add these properties, let's do base damage. We're going to set that to be a number. And now we'll have is attacking. That'll be a Boolean. And now for each of our instances, we'll need some methods to allow us to attack in our various directions. And then that way we can play our various animations and then update our physics body to be in that location for our weapon. So we'll do attack up, and then we'll do each of our directions. And so this will return void. So I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 more times. So then we'll have attack down, and then we'll have attack right and attack left. Next, we'll add in our update method. And so this will be used by our weapon component to call our update method on our weapons. This will be used by our projectile weapon types. So as an example, when our boss throws his dagger at our player, we'll need to call our update method to update our game object. Finally, we'll add in one more method, and this is going to be on collision callback. Now this method will be used for allowing our weapon game objects to collide with our world, and then we can call this callback once that collision happens. That way we can disable our game object and remove our sprite from our game. Now that we have our new weapon interface, let's create our weapon component. So under our components, our game object, let's add a new file. We'll do weapon component. Let's go into our speed component. Let's copy our code from here. We'll paste it. We'll update our class name. So we'll have our weapon component. So now in our component, we'll need 2 properties. Our first will be our weapon instance that our player currently has equipped. And so for our type, this is going to be our weapon interface that we just defined, or it can be undefined if our player does not have anything equipped currently. Next, we'll need a property to keep track of our weapon's physics body. And so we're going to do weapon physics body. For this will be our phaser, our physics, our arcade, and our body. So how we'll use our weapon's physics body is instead of creating a physics body for each of our weapon types in our game and needing to manage all of the collision checks between that particular weapon and our various enemies, we'll just simplify this by having one physics body that we attach to our weapon component. Then for our collision checks, we only need to worry about checking for collisions between our weapon component's physics body and our enemy game objects. Now, when we don't have a weapon equipped, our physics body and our weapon component will be disabled, but when we do have a weapon attached, when we go to attack with that weapon, then we'll update our physics body's shape to match the shape of the weapon we're attacking with. By doing this, it'll simplify our collision logic between our player's weapon and our enemies. Next, in our constructor, let's remove our speed argument. Let's get rid of our code for our speed, and now we need to define our property, so we'll do our physics bodies, we'll do this, our weapon physics body. We'll need to reference our game object, our scene our game object belongs to. Let's do our physics. We'll do add. We'll do a body. And now we just want to define a placeholder for where we want to position our body at. So we'll do our game object's X and Y value. And then for our width and height, we'll just do 1 pixel by 1 pixel. And so by doing this, this will create our physics body so it's ready. And now we need to disable it. And so we'll do this, our weapon's physics body. We'll do enable, and we're going to set that to be false. And so by creating our physics body here, now it's ready to be used. And so once we create our sword game object and we go to attack with it, that's when we'll update our positioning of where our body should be, as well as our width and our height, depending on the direction we're attacking with our sword. Finally, one last thing we'll do is we'll want to assign this component to our weapon's physics body. So we're going to do this, we'll do assign component to object, and we'll do this in our weapon's physics body. And so the reason we're adding our component to our physics body is once we go to add in our collision checks between our enemy's weapons and our player, what our collision check is really doing is it's going to use our weapon's physics body from our enemy's weapon component and then check for a collision between that and our player. And when that happens, we'll get a reference to our weapon's physics body that our collision happened with and our player. From that body, we'll need to know which weapon component it belongs to, so then that way we can stop our animation and stop updating our weapon. So as an example, when our boss throws our dagger, if it collides with our player, we immediately want to disable our body and then remove that game object from our scene instead of having that object continue to animate and move through our player. And so by assigning our weapon component to our physics body, we'll be able to do that lookup. And so to support this change, we need to go into our base object component. We need to update our assign component to object, our type here. So instead of just game object, we'll also want to support our phaser, our physics, our arcade, and then our body. So now if we come back to our weapon component, now we'll want to add in our getters and setters. First, we'll add in a getter and setter for our weapon. And so we'll have get weapon. This will return our weapon instance or undefined. And we'll return this.weapon. And now we'll do a setter for our weapon. So we'll do set weapon. For this, we'll get a weapon. Now for our type, this can be a weapon or it can be undefined. And so we'll do this, our weapon, we'll set equal to our weapon. And now we're going to add a getter for getting our physics body. And so we'll do get body. This will be our phaser, our physics, our arcade, our body. So we'll return this, our weapon's physics body. And now we'll add in a getter for our weapon damage. And so we'll do get weapon damage. This will be a number. And so we'll do if this weapon is undefined, we'll return 0. Otherwise, we want to return this, our weapon, and then our base damage. Finally, we'll add in our update method that'll allow us to call our update method on our weapon. So we're going to do public, we'll do update, we'll return nothing, and so we'll do if this, our weapon, if it's undefined, we don't need to do anything, so we'll just return. Otherwise, we'll do this, our weapon, and we'll call update. Oh, we just need to update our references here. So we want to reference our private property, and now we get rid of this, and the same thing here. Now that we have our new weapon component, we can update our attack state to use our component. So let's jump over to our attack state. In our onEnter method, after we reset our GameObject's velocity, we'll want to try to grab a reference to our weapon component. If it exists and we have a weapon equipped, then we'll want to attack with our weapon. If we don't have a weapon equipped, we'll go back to our idle state. So I'm going to uncomment our code here for our held component. We'll update our references, and so we'll have our weapon component. For our variable name, we'll do weapon component. And then we'll update our check here. So if our weapon component is undefined, or our weapon component, our weapon is undefined, then we want to go back to our idle state. So I'm going to copy this line of code here. Let's add it into here. Let's clean up this code here before we throw our item. And so after we go to our idle state, we'll return early. And so now if we do have a weapon, now we'll want to attack with it. So we'll get a reference to our weapon. So we're going to do const weapon. We're going to set it equal to our weapon component, our weapon. And now we need to check our GameObject's direction and then attack in that direction. So we'll do switch. Let's do this, our GameObject, our direction. And now if our direction is up, we'll want to do our weapon and we'll do attack up. And we'll go ahead and return this. Now we'll copy that block of code. We'll paste it 3 times. And so now we'll have down, left, and right. So now we'll have attack down, attack left, and then attack right. Finally, we'll add in our default case, and we'll just do our exhaustive guard. So we'll do this, our GameObject, our direction. So then we can remove our code here for going to our idle state. So now down in our onUpdate method, we want to get a reference to our weapon component, and we'll do the same check. We'll make sure that's defined and we have a weapon equipped. And if we don't, we'll go to our idle state. So let's copy this block of code here. Let's paste it here at the top of our method. And so now if we do have a weapon, now we want to wait until we're done attacking with that weapon before we go to our idle state. So to do that check, we'll grab a reference to our weapon. And now we'll do if our weapon, if it is attacking, then we'll return. If we're done attacking with our weapon, now we want to go back to our idle state. That's it for this part of the series. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you're following along, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions or want to share your progress, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.